The fifth annual meeting of ID4Africa has an overarching theme, which is identity ecosystems for service delivery. This overarching theme emphasizes that identity systems need to be useful for them to contribute to development. But underneath that overarching theme, we actually have multiple thematic tracks, all focused on different aspects of identity. For example, identity for inclusion. That is a major track which we are presenting in partnership with MasterCard. And it focuses mostly on financial inclusion and beyond. And it basically explains the importance of identity, especially digital identity, in creating inclusive societies and in allowing people access to services and improving government reform of service delivery.
So about 1.7 billion people worldwide are still financially excluded. If you think about Africa, 43% of the population have a bank account or a mobile money account. So there's tremendous work yet to be done in Africa, and that is why we as MasterCard, but also we as my particular team, the Humanitarian and Development team, are mobilizing our technology and our resources to create more digital inclusion, especially at the base of the pyramid or people living at or below the poverty line, where we believe we can drive more financial inclusion by creating new technologies, but also new innovative business models that'll, at the end of the day, offer more people access to the formal digital economy. ID4Africa is a place where we can showcase our functional ID. We call it the inclusive identity. What it allows us to do is to take someone who has been previously excluded, right, uniquely identify them in their different, if you will, personas. I might be a smallholder farmer, but I might also have a child in school or a newborn at home that requires vaccinations. Currently, I'm receiving those services across different service providers in an analog and paper-based way. Our ambition is to digitize those processes to make them more efficient and more transparent. The only way you can do that, though, is if you're actually able to identify me as that same individual, either receiving a vaccination for my kid, right, or sending my other child to school, or essentially selling my goods and services in the market. Providing a functional identity allows us then to digitize the services and therefore create more efficiency in the system.
We'll also have another track which has to do with the foundational aspects of identity, such as civil registration, civil identification, the enabling frameworks, privacy and data protection. So all of the enabling environment and the experiences that the African governments have had in building foundational identity systems. And we have also one very exciting thematic which has to do with infants. How do you deal with identity management for infants? Why is this an important problem? This is an important problem because entry into legal identity begins at birth. And so if we cannot link a newly born to their legal identity from the start, we will have a gap and we will have a problem. But from health point of view as well, from vaccination, from following up on health needs of children, infants, and the assistance that their mothers might need in raising them through a critical period of time. So identity management of infants and babies is a priority for ID4Africa because it is the doorway to legal identity.
So ID4Africa is a unique platform which brings together governments, private sectors, development organizations, and all the people who are involved in the identity ecosystem. And the agenda of digital identity is very important to the foundation because we believe it is an enabler. It is one of the biggest barriers that prevents the poor from accessing their rights, from accessing the services that are due to them, from not being cheated out of what they are due by their governments. So identity is very important, and what ID4Africa does very well is serve as a knowledge sharing platform. It highlights the problems that are being faced by the practitioners all over the world, especially in Africa, and serving as a platform where knowledge exchange can happen. The ambassadors program, for example, takes this agenda forward into the country governments. It gives them an opportunity to see what other countries are doing, what is possible. And a lot of the time, ideas are born in very short moments. but then it takes a lot of time for them to achieve results. And I think ID4Africa is a very useful ground for ideation.
One other thing that is very exciting about this year that is new and different than the years before is the launch of a new institution, which we call the ID4Africa Identity Council. In fact, we are not alien to the idea of building institutions. Since 2016, we've been building institutions to empower African talent. We built the Ambassador Program, which by any measure has become a phenomenal success. Today, 43 countries officially designate ambassadors, one per country, to serve their needs and to act as a link between the movement and their agencies, national agencies. But we've gone one step beyond the Ambassador Program this year. We have launched what we consider an expert council that brings in all these Pan-African talent under one roof to collectively act in the interest of Africa, provide guidance, provide advice, and also pronounce on certain matters that might at some point become politically charged. The Identity Council, the ID4Africa Identity Council, will be holding its first meeting to elect its leadership. Yes, there will be a president of the council, and there will be a vice president of the council, and they will be elected from the 43 ambassadors. We want to retain these ambassadors to stay working in their institutions, and the only way we can do that is by empowering them to make decisions for themselves. Otherwise, the brain drain will continue to happen in Africa, and talent will continue to be attracted to go to international or to the private sector. By creating powerful institutions and empowering these people to complement their national institutions, I think we can help African governments retain talent and even reinforce it by building more talent to support the activities and the plans for an institution like the IIC, the Identity Council.
The ID4Africa Council basically is the operational arm of the ID4Africa movement. It represents all the shared experience of the countries in terms of the establishment of digital identity systems. So we have countries who are very much advanced and others who have a long way to go. So the goal is to, as I said initially, is to share those experiences, advise, consult, assist whenever we can. We have a wealth of expertise and experience, technical, legal, procedural, financial. So it's a chance for Africa to put in practice all the recommendations, all the strategies, all the lessons that have been learned throughout the 5 years of the existence of the ID4Africa movement.
One other matter that is taking center stage in our agenda this year is the complex issue of privacy, data protection, and appropriate use of identity. In fact, we have a major activity dedicated to the subject every day, starting with a roundtable of the African data protection authorities that will unite all of the African data protection authorities that are very active in the area, along with their international allies, in a closed session. It's a workshop of 6 hours where they are going to work together to define common approaches to data protection when it comes to identity systems. The RADPA meeting will define a common approach, and the output of RADPA will be presented in the very next day to the identity authorities to begin a dialogue. And then the third day, we will bring in ethics experts and scholars who will talk about the importance of bringing in the appropriate and the responsible dimension to the use of identity.
So we just had a roundtable of data protection authorities. Essentially, it's a dialogue that happened on the back of the ID4Africa conference predominantly to promote a Pan-African dialogue on data protection amongst the data protection regulators in Africa. And the agenda is to tease out what the challenges are as far as data protection is concerned, and what the authorities are looking at doing or what they've put in place in their respective countries to counter the data protection challenges as far as implementation of ID systems are concerned. Today, essentially, we wanted all the data protection authorities to talk about what was happening in their respective countries. We wanted them to also share the challenges, which, as we found out, are very common amongst them, the challenges that they are facing as regulators generally, and then also as regulators that have to ensure that there's data protection compliance within the implementation of identity systems in their various countries. So we were expecting them to come up with these, and then also to help them foster a relationship that going forward will facilitate a better dialogue between the identity community and the data protection authorities. One of the strong things that came up is the fact that this dialogue has to continue and needs to continue and probably grow, to involve other stakeholders in the communications. And so the need to have this platform on the back of ID4Africa is very critical.
So I've worked in a lot of other countries, including developing countries. So some of the issues and things that I heard here today and that were discussed very eloquently by the data protection authorities relate to what I would call growing pains. So I do think that there are solutions at hand, but it is very difficult to install data protection in any jurisdiction and then have all of the stakeholders agree and comply with the new laws, especially when they're brand new. In one case here, there was a law that was a data protection law that was only 1 month old. So in situations like this, you will have growing pains. And I think we saw some specific growing pains that are unique to Africa, but in some ways that are also felt around all jurisdictions.
I'm part of the Media Network digital identity team, and we see a tremendous opportunity as many African countries are introducing new ID systems to make sure that those systems as they're introduced are good ID, which means that they're introduced with a focus on user agency and control, they're introduced transparently, involve privacy and security, and they ultimately deliver value and services to citizens. And so we have a tremendous development agenda for Africa, and the ID4Africa movement is a great opportunity to coalesce people who are also concerned about these issues. So for a media network, we really want to see technology empower people. We know that technology is an enabler of development, and without being officially able to represent ourselves and participate, not to have an identity, is very disempowering for people who may not be able to get services, health or education, or social services, or even KYC or SIM card registration. What we also see is doing right not only can empower and enable them, but also sometimes is the first entry point people have to the digital economy more generally. And to make sure that these technologies are introduced in a way that minimizes the risks and harms.
The 5th annual meeting in Johannesburg is a milestone and has achieved many key and important points that we have tried to achieve in 5 years. But the question is, where do we go from here, and where does our roadmap take us? I'm very pleased to say that 2020, our 6th annual meeting, will be held in Marrakesh, Morocco. And there is significance to that location when we understand the theme of the annual meeting. The theme of the annual meeting will be Identity 360. And what that means is that we are going to treat identity not from one perspective only, that there is no such thing as one identity. There is actually multiple facets of looking at identity. And so Identity 360 is an approach where we will examine identity from all aspects without privileging one. National identity card is not by itself identity. Civil registration by itself is not identity, but they all contribute to identity. And I think that theme builds on what we're doing in Johannesburg and what we did in Johannesburg, because we brought in the stakeholders. The stakeholders were already participating with us. Now the idea is to bring them around a theme that unites them and gives each one of them a role that complements each other. So Identity 360 will be the theme for the 6th annual meeting of ID4Africa in 2020, Marrakesh, Morocco, June 2nd to 4th.